Hello and welcome to Mr. Valentin's YouTube video for the Mythology review on your test. Today we're going to review a couple things. We're going to start off by examining the vocabulary that we learned for this Mythology unit. Then we are going to progress onto the traits of an epic as well as the 5 rules of Greece. Then we're going to review 3 of our most important stories. That is Theseus and the Minotaur, Atlanta, and Perseus. So let's begin. So these are the 7 vocabulary words that you needed to know for your unit. So let's review them. We start off with the word kindred, which is a person's relatives, collectively, associated by origin, nature, and qualities. We have the word mortified, which is an adjective meaning extremely embarrassed. We have the word despair, which means a loss of hope, hopelessness, or to give up hope. We have the word wavering, which means to sway to and fro. All right. Also meaning to become unsteady. We have revelry, which is a boisterous festivity. Deity, which is a god or goddess, as well as a divine character. And finally, we have the word reconcile, which is to win over to friendliness. On your test, you should definitely know the definitions. You should also know how to put these words into sentences. So, let's try an example. So the first sentence. Sharing a similar mythology, the Romans and Greeks used different names, Mercury and Hermes, for the same blank. So what would be the best fit for this sentence? And of course, for this sentence, the best answer would be deity. Taking a look at the second sentence. Locked in the dark chest, adrift on the ocean, Danae must have felt blank at the chances of survival for her and her son. Now, we know a couple things, alright? Well, certainly kindred doesn't fit there. I guess she could have felt embarrassed, although that's not exactly what you think of when you're dying, so we could leave that sort of on the table. All right. Hopelessness, alright, could she feel hopeless at this chance? That sounds like a certain strong possibility. Wavering doesn't fit. She's certainly not having a festivity inside a dark chest. Deity does not fit at all. And she's not trying to win over anything. She is worried about dying. So, of course, the best answer here would be despair. So as long as you know the definitions, all right, the sentences should be completely fine. So that is the vocabulary review for the exam. You're going to need to know the 5 rules of ancient Greece, as well as the 4 traits of an epic. So I'm just going to very briefly review what those 5 traits are. So the first thing is you do not kill kindred. The second, hubris, excessive pride, is a sin. Continuing on, 3, all things in moderation. Hospitality is of the utmost importance. And finally, proper burial is required for all. So know the 5 rules of ancient Greece. They're important. They're vital to the story. Fine. All right. The last important thing is the 4 traits of an epic. You need to know the 4 traits of an epic, and you need to be able to define them. So, the 4 traits of an epic. The first is that there's an epic hero. That is, a larger-than-life character who fights against evil. Usually the epic hero in Greek mythology is of divine birth. The second is a quest. That is a long, dangerous journey undertaken by said epic hero. The third is valorous deeds. Actions that demonstrate the hero's courage, strength, or virtue. And finally, you have divine intervention. The hero receives help from the god or some type of supernatural force. Not only do you need to know the 4 traits of an epic, but you also need to be able to show examples of them from our various mythologies. So, what we're going to do is we're going to review some of the more important parts of our stories. Okay, so our first story is Theseus. What I don't want to do for you is go over each story piece by piece, because we've read the story in class. You have your study packets, which you can review from. So I don't want to be too redundant on a lot of the information. But there might be a couple details that you either forgot or that you need a little bit of brushing up on. So if you have your packets, that'll be helpful. If you have your actual handouts with the story of Theseus on there, that'll be helpful. So, a couple things. All right. Theseus is the son of King, I meant to capitalize, King Aegeus. So, and King Aegeus is the person who puts Theseus immediately to a test. He, hides a sword and a pair of shoes, and he covers them under a great stone. And he tells his wife, when his child is born, and if his child is a boy, then he should be able to have access to these weapons, and he will be so strong he'll just move the rocks himself. And so he does. So you should definitely know that. So as he gets older, he gets his swords, he does all of that following, and so he goes to the land of Athens. That's an important location, so you should know it. He meets his father, and his father's love interest, lady friend, has the idea of poisoning Theseus, because she views Theseus as a threat to the kingdom. And that woman's name is Medea. Medea is a very popular character. She is very important because she's the heroine in the story of the Quest of the Golden Fleece. So she tries to poison Theseus, so keep that in mind. We then get some backstory about how Theseus gets into a fight with the Minotaur and goes to this location known as the Labyrinth. So, first thing, there's a powerful ruler of Crete, and his name is Minos. So there's Minos, the powerful ruler. And he loses his son, and his son's name is Androgeus. So he dies in in a quest for peril. And the person whose fault it is King Aegeus's. So this becomes kind of a quarrel between Minos and Aegeus. So we want to make sure. Androgeus is the son of Minos. So in the quarrel between Aegeus and Minos, Minos ends up invading the country. He captures Athens, and he declares that he would destroy it to the ground unless every 9 years they sent tributes, a la the Hunger Games, of 7 maidens and 7 youths. And each of these young people would face a horrible fate. So when they reached Crete, they were given to the Minotaur to devour. So a little bit about the Minotaur. The Minotaur is a half man, half monster. Half man, half bull. Monster creation. And the way he's created is, shall we say, a tad bit disturbing. All right. So, Minos' wife, Pasiphae, you should know her. Oops, spelled her name wrong. Pasiphae. She ends up having, shall we say, recreational activities with a bull. So Pasiphae falls in love with a bull. And that's all because of a war with Poseidon and everything else. And so she gives birth to said Minotaur. The Minotaur is such a horrific creature, but Minos doesn't want to kill it because it's sort of his stepson. So he has an architect whose name is Daedalus, which is another story we read, and he constructs the Labyrinth. So all these names you should become familiar with. A labyrinth is a giant maze, and it's often considered very confusing, and so people would go into this giant labyrinth to fight the Minotaur, get lost, and end up being killed by said Minotaur. Then we're introduced to a character known as Ariadne. And she's important because Theseus wants to go fight the Minotaur, and she gives the answer to how to defeat the Minotaur. So she reveals how to kill the Minotaur and escape safely. And in exchange, Theseus has to marry her. So, when Theseus goes to fight the Minotaur, he simply just batters it to death. He beats it with his bare hands, which shows what an epic hero he actually is. He then uses a ball of twine, hence ball of twine right up here in the upper right hand corner, uses this ball of twine, and he follows it all the way back to the door, and he manages to escape. And that's it. What happens to Ariadne afterwards is a little vague. He returns back to Athens, and Aegeus is overcome with guilt as he arrives back, and Aegeus, upon Theseus's return, he thinks Theseus isn't going to return, so he kills himself. So I guess we can add that, right? That King Aegeus kills himself because he's convinced that Theseus won't come back, and it has to do with the sail that Theseus was supposed to put up. details, not 100% important, but it is important that he kills himself. And so there needs to be a new ruler of Athens, and so the new ruler is Theseus. So Theseus. And then the story, in true Greek mythology fashion, starts to unfold into the craziest of ways. Theseus falls in love with an Amazon, and the Amazon's name is Hippolyta. They then have a child, and there's questions about the child's name, but we go with the name, since it seems to be named after his mother, Hippolytus. And there's all these other various different adventures that occur throughout the story, whether he's going to see the centaurs, whether he goes and quite literally fights death, and Hercules ends up saving Theseus. There's all these different little stories. They're of various importance. You should be semi-familiar at least with that Hercules went and saved Theseus, that Theseus wanted to marry Helen as a child, that the Amazons took Hippolyta back. All those little odds and ends of the story you should know, and it's all in your packet. So we've done this before. This is just a third affirmation of everything. But there are a handful of last-minute details that become very important, and that's when we're introduced to the character of Phaedra. Phaedra is Theseus's new wife, and Phaedra, in a kind of disgusting, slightly sickening twist, falls in love with her stepson, who happens to be Hippolytus. So Phaedra falls in love with Hippolytus, and she's horrified by it, and then she doesn't know what to do, so she, of course, does what most stories characters do when they're horrified in Greek mythology, and she ends up killing herself. And the death is blamed on Hippolytus. And who blames her? Why, none other than the epic hero of our story, Theseus. And then Theseus learns the errors of his ways. And of course, at the end of our story with Theseus, he ends up dead as well. So you have all these characters, and we kind of meet them, and they all die. All right. So it's definitely an odd story, and there's a lot of characters. The story of Atlanta is considerably more straightforward in comparison to Theseus, and it's kind of why I like the story so much. So we're introduced to the character Atlanta, and her father immediately abandons her. So we'll start there. Atlanta's father abandons her. He can't bear that he has a female child. The idea of a daughter just totally disappoints him. In fact, they use the words quite literally, bitterly disappointed. So he does the logical thing, and he leaves his child to die on the side of a mountain. And in a moment of divine intervention, some bear sees baby Atlanta on the side and raises it, and she kind of becomes this fierce warrior and extremely agile individual. And so she becomes the fastest runner in the world. And so the story of Atlanta is all about this fast runner. And there's a very famous boar fight, and it's the fight of the Caledonian boar. Autocorrect is not my friend today. Caledonian boar hunt. And in the Caledonian boar hunt, she is the first person to injure the boar. She's not the first person to kill the boar, but she is the first person to injure it. And as such, when the boar is killed by a character known as Meleager, Meleager gives all of the pelts and all of the trophies to Atalanta because she was the one who injured it. Meleager's mother, Althea, can't stand this. She's totally disgusted with it. And so she vows to kill Meleager. Meleager ends up killing uncles, and it's this whole dramatic thing. The most important thing, Atalanta survives through all of it. So keep that in mind. And she doesn't want to marry anybody. That's her whole thing. It says in the text, it seems odd that a number of men wanted to marry her because she could hunt and shoot and wrestle, but it was so. She had a great many suitors. As a way of disposing of them easily and agreeably, she declared that she would marry whoever could beat her in a foot race, but she always outran them. And that's when we're introduced to the character Millennium. And Millennium has an idea to win, and so he throws these golden apples to distract Atalanta. And does it work? Of course it does. And so they end up getting married. And then in true Greek fashion, all right, she ends up marrying him. And then later on they're turned into lions because of Zeus or Aphrodite. The text literally does not make it clear which one they bothered. It says, the two were said to have been turned into lions because of some affront offered either to Zeus or Aphrodite. But before that, Atalanta had borne a son, Parthenopeus, who was one of the 7 against Thebes. All right, so she's turned into a lion, and that's the end of that story. So there you go. There's Atalanta. And our final story is Perseus, a story that's as equally convoluted and crazy as the rest of these stories. So, a couple things. King Acrisius is the first character we're introduced to. And King Acrisius just want to make sure I spell Acrisius correct. Acrisius gets a fortune told to him. And in his fortune, it is revealed that King Acrisius' daughter will give birth to a son, and this son will kill King Acrisius. And so this horrible story, he finds out, and he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't want to kill his daughter, because that would be going against one of the 5 great sins. So he does the logical thing, and he locks his daughter up so she'll never see the light of day. But as fate has, fate will happen, and in an act of divine intervention, the logical/illogical thing happens, of course. Zeus rains down. Literally, in a golden rain, Zeus rains down. And in that whole instance, the daughter gets pregnant, and she gives birth to Perseus. And so Perseus is born, and he's a child, and he's growing up, and all he sees are these horrible walls, and he's not allowed to leave. And finally, King Acrisius realizes that his daughter had a child, and he's convinced it must not be with not with Zeus. It just couldn't have been. What lies and what blasphemy. So he's upset, and again, he doesn't want the prophecy to be filled that this child, Perseus, will kill him, so he does the next logical thing. He puts his daughter and Perseus into a chest and throws them in the water, in the hopes that he doesn't kill them, but them either suffocating to death or drowning, or wherever the treasure chest ends up, that will be the end of them. So this whole thing happens, and then in another act of divine intervention, this fisherman finds him, and they save him, and who comes back into the picture but more of these kind of horrific evil villain characters, and in the end, for this villainous character, Perseus wants to do the logical thing and give a gift for the wedding, and his mother, the daughter of King Acrisius, has to marry, and so in our crazy story, he decides to go kill the Gorgons, all right, or one of the Gorgons. So Perseus, and this is really the most important thing, Perseus, if I could spell Perseus, it would be even better. Perseus wants to kill Medusa, one of the 3 Gorgons, and so he goes on this gigantic quest. You know about the gigantic quest. It involves these Greek women, the Grey Women, and finding like the eyeball, and then meeting Hermes, who gives him this kind of journey, and then he goes and he gets these 3 items, and the items are like these boots and a shield and an invisible hat, and in the end, alright, the most important thing is Perseus kills Medusa. Alright, you should know that. And Medusa would turn people to stone, but he can't look at them, so he uses the reflection and the shield, and yada yada yada. Alright, so we have this whole kind of story unraveling. And as he's traveling back, he sees a woman who's an Ethiop, and her name is Andromeda, and he instantly falls in love with her, and wants to marry her, and so he saves her from a giant sea serpent. And then at the end of the story, his mother, Danae is her name, he saves her from her evil husband by entering an athletic competition, and in this athletic competition he throws a discus and ends up killing King Acrisius. So Perseus ends up killing King Acrisius as the story was untold. So there you have it. So there's a crazy story, but the most important characters you need to know are Perseus, you need to know Medusa, you need to know Andromeda, and that should be it. Alright, you don't have to worry about the rest of these secondary characters. Just knowing that and knowing the story of Medusa is more important than all of the excess information. So there you have it. There's one last part on the test, so let's go over that, and then we're all set. The last part of your test is being able to identify singular and plural possessives, or just plural in general. So we'll take a look at these, and we'll indicate which ones are correct. All right. So, real quickly, examine Andromeda apostrophe S or Andromeda's apostrophe beauty. All right. So you need to know some of the characters' names so that you know whether their name ends in an S. Andromeda's name is simply Andromeda. All right. So the first one, Andromeda apostrophe S, is the correct answer. The second one, look at Hercules' strength. All right. So Hercules is his full name, so his name ends in an S. So all you need after that is simply an apostrophe, not an apostrophe S, because his name already ends in an S. The third one, the geese, apostrophe S, geese's apostrophe tail got wet in the pond. They're talking about one goose and how its tail got wet in the pond, so the correct answer would be the gooses. And finally, the paintings are beautiful masterpiece, apostrophe S, masterpieces, apostrophe, masterpieces, or masterpieces, apostrophe. It's supposed to say apostrophe S. That's fine. All right, because none of those are the correct answer, except for, of course, masterpieces. All right, you don't need to apostrophe S anything if they're just making a general statement about something that's plural. So, there you go. So you should know that. We've done that a bunch of times in class. It's fairly easy at this point. So there you go. So we're at the end of another review session. Sorry some of it sounded so crazy because the stories tend to be very crazy and mishmashed and jumping all over the place. And so if I sounded like I'm jumping all over the place, it's probably because I wasn't. It's just that's the way some of the stories run. So keep that in mind. If you have questions, please see me for help and review. And that's really it. I wish you the best of luck with reviewing and studying. Please come to Extra Help with any questions. And that's pretty much it. Please like my videos and leave comments and all of that stuff. Have a great day.